Would you say MLB on the whole is on decline compared to the NBA and the NFL, or do you think they're holding their own? What do you see?
Oh, I think it's the opposite. I think right now there's a sort of, in terms of the sort of dominant professional sports in America right now, there's the NFL in a league of its own. And then there's Major League Baseball in a league of its own, below the NFL, but above any other sports. And then there's sort of like, depending on how you measure it, by revenues, by interest, by regionality, there's some sort of level 3 that involves the NBA, NASCAR, and also the NHL, even sort of depending, because the NHL fills up arenas, regularly. The NHL sort of has a lot of, it's a $2 to $3 billion business itself. Major League Baseball, I think, is now a $6 billion business by comparison. The NFL is a $7 billion business. So there's a lot of money being made in the NBA and the NHL and the NASCAR, but baseball and football are a whole other ball game. And then we haven't even factored in college sports, specifically college football. College basketball is sort of a big deal, but it's only a big deal for about a month and a half of the year.
Right.
College football is a big deal for
pretty much the whole, yeah.
Really for the whole year.
Because every game matters.
I mean for the whole year, like the NFL. They sort of have figured out a way to sort of have the entire year have sort of signposts, right?
Because every game matters so much.
No, you're not listening to me. But let me finish and I'll tell you. Right, both the NFL and college football has sort of, scarcity of product, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that the NFL, like the combine, is a pretty interesting story. NFL fans pay a lot of attention to the draft combine. Then NFL fans pay a lot of attention to free agency. And then they pay a lot of attention to the draft. And they pay a lot of attention to minicamp. And then they pay a lot of attention to training camp, right? All those are things that kind of get you excited, right? You're an NFL fan. That's a whole year calendar I just described. Because I gave you, there's 5 months of the calendar year of games, and then all of these other things that sort of feel really important. In fact, as an Arizona Cardinals fan, the draft is much more satisfying to me than most seasons are. College football has it too, right? Not quite as much, but they have signing day that everybody pays attention to. Then they have 7-on-7 the spring games. And then they have their own training camp, and all of a sudden, boom, you're back in the college football season. Both of those sports are unique in that they have both scarcity of product and events that dominate the whole calendar. It's weird.
But you can counter that basketball also has...
Nobody pays attention to the draft nearly as much. And by the way, they do the draft right after the NBA finals are over. In football, they don't. They're actually really smart. Think about that. Just think about are you a football fan?
Yeah, no, you're right.
Think about how your year goes. It's like, you start to get excited, but you start reading, you'll read about the combine, right? Because it's like, oh, who tested well, who didn't, what's going on? Then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, the draft is coming, that's cool. That draft weekend has turned into something amazing. And then it's like minicamps, cool, I wonder what I'm hearing about in minicamps, who's doing well, who's practicing, who's not. Then it's training camp. It's like, it's different than any other sport. It really is. It's really smart. I don't think it was intentional, I just think it developed that way.
And why is baseball second above them all?
Just in terms of revenues. Because baseball has the opposite. They don't have scarcity of product. They have so much product that still is compelling enough to people that people just come and watch. People go to games. Attendance has been setting records. It just has been.
Per the performance on TV, which athletes of the major three would you say make the most and make the least?
Per the performance on TV, what do you mean?
Well, based upon the amount of games they play, would you say who makes the least and who makes the most?
Based on the amount of games that they play. And if that's the case, I would imagine it would be the NBA. NBA per game are probably, right? Because baseball, the salaries are the highest far and away, right? Baseball is the one in which I've never heard of are making $7 million a year, right? Where the best players in football are often making that amount of money, right? So it's like, but I guess football players also, but the average salary for a football player I think is below the average salary for a baseball player. On the other hand, baseball players play more games. On the other hand, it's not as taxing. It's hard to say. I'd still say it's probably the NBA. But the biggest gains over the past 10 years are actually in the NHL. The NHL sort of salaries really got huge over the past 10 years.
What would it take for the NBA to make the tier of MLB? Do you think they're getting there, or they're so far away?
Well, the NBA is, just in terms of revenues, just doesn't equal the Major League Baseball. So they're far away in terms of revenue. So I just think like that's just a function of sort of...
But developing in China, do you think?
Yeah, well, the NBA has probably the best prospects of the four major sports. The NBA has the best prospects for international growth, which is clearly what David Stern knows. The NFL, it's hard to know how well it can be exported. Baseball is played in lots of places, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot of upside simply because the sport has been around for a long time overseas and hasn't quite captured the imagination of a lot of other fans in the way that basketball has over the past 20 years. Basically since the Michael Jordan era.
And
Yeah.
Moving on to some of the smaller sports, how's tennis doing?
How's tennis doing worldwide, or how's tennis doing in the United States?
United States.
Yeah, it's okay.
Are people tuning into Wimbledon and the French Open, or the time differences?
A little bit. The time differences are difficult. Wimbledon and the U.S. Open are a little bit more of a draw. The Australian Open people barely notice as a major. The problem is that there's just no compelling male stars that do well in tennis in the U.S., right? You know, if there was a Jimmy Connors or even a John McEnroe or even a Pete Sampras, it would be better for the sport here, but there's nobody that's been even remotely close to challenging Nadal or Roger Federer, the numbers 2 and number 1 male players in the world.
Have you, which of the big have you had profiles on? Have you done Roddick? Have you done Blake?
Oh, we've done all of them over the years, yeah.
And how about the specific rivalry or the nascent rivalry between Nadal and Federer? Have you tried to cover that, or?
Yeah, we've talked about that. I mean, it's a little bit more wishful thinking, right? Because when it comes to majors, which in tennis, again, like in golf or the Olympics, it really counts. It's hard to sort of think that it's a rivalry between Nadal and Federer. I mean, Federer is just clearly so much better, except on clay. And, you know, not even.
Do you think that story will be big until he wins clay? I mean, Sampras, that seemed to always be a big story. He never won the French Open. Will that be something every French Open you guys will try to cover, or not really?
I'm not interested in that much. Federer is just one of the most dominant athletes of our generation, so I just think he's fascinating.
But how about the idea that he can't win on clay in the French Open?
It's not that he can't win on clay.
He has.
He said he has a much more difficult time winning on clay.
Right, he has yet to this point.
He has won on clay, just hasn't won in the way that he wanted to win on clay.
Right. When you have a boxing, what do you see the future of boxing?
I don't know. I've become more interested in boxing over the past few years, but I think I'm sort of the rarity. I think like there are sort of some interesting fighters, Ricky Hatton, Mayweather, people like that. But broadly, I think boxing sort of still suffers from, you know, the alphabet soup of governing bodies and the fact that people still suspect it of being sort of crooked. But it has a strong cult following and probably always will. And periodically, it pops into the sort of more mainstream sports universe, or just more mainstream universe. But the problem is the only way it does that usually is with heavyweights. And right now there are not really any compelling heavyweight stories. You know, the Klitschko brothers are just not compelling to my mom. My mom has no idea who the Klitschko's brother was. My mom knew who Mike Tyson was. My mom knew who Muhammad Ali was. My mom knew who George Foreman was. She just didn't know. She doesn't know.
Well, why did she know them? Because
there's something about the.
Because the mainstream media, they decided to
because
cover.
There was not decided. There's just sort of these things aren't. There's no meeting of the mainstream media in which we say, yes, we're going to cover Larry Holmes or George Foreman. No, we're not going to cover the Klitschkos. It's just about compelling character. And right now, there's not enough compelling characters in the heavy division.
How about Miguel Cotto in the lighter division?
I mean, there's lots of people in the lighter division that are sort of interesting. The problem is, it's like, but even me as the editor of ESPN the magazine, it's like, you know, I sort of know the middleweight division better than I know the super bantamweight division. But all of it sort of depends on whether or not they're sort of particularly compelling stories. The problem is you want the heavies to be big, because the heavies are the people that sort of make the claim, I'm the toughest fighter in the world, whether or not they are or not. That's what's sort of tough, is that unless you have the heavyweights sort of with charismatic characters, nobody ends up sort of being engaged.
How about the Roy Jones Jr. Trinidad fight? Are you going to cover that, or does that interest you, the result of that, before that, or not really?
You know, it's like you can go down the list of sort of any individual fight, and it's just a lot of the things are going to depend on whether or not sort of there's my boxing editor comes to me with a compelling reason to sort of do something. We don't. ESPN.com will cover everything. ESPN the network will cover everything. We have to pick our spots because we have to kill trees every time we publish a magazine, and so we don't cover every sport comprehensively. We cover every sport sort of as smartly as we can and as sort of creatively as we can, picking particular story angles or particular sort of lines of thought to think. And I think this has to be your last question. Okay.
Are you influenced when deciding which stories go in, do not go in, by what ESPN covers and has rights?
100%, because ESPN, the network and ESPN, the website, have to make decisions based on the zeitgeist, based on what they think is going on right now in people's interest. We're trying to predict people's interest, but part of predicting the future is paying attention to the present. And so, yeah, very much so. We're always talking to people throughout the ESPN brand about what they're thinking and what they're doing, so that affects our coverage.
Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's Gary Belsky, editor of ESPN the magazine.